Another week, another great guest. We've got the great Ben Fennell in the house tonight. It's Jake Morley's back too, and I'm here like I always am. Boys and girls, let's hit it.
I love gold.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It is Wednesday, March 24th, 2021. This is the Gold Zone presented by Game On Wisconsin. I'm your host tonight. I am Jacob Westendorf, joined by my better counterparts here after a week on hiatus, talking a little offensive tackles last week. And he said that was just too real of a position for him to talk about, but that is Jake Morley. Jake is back. Jake, how we doing?
Good. Yeah, I'm glad you guys got that one out of the way. Just not a position that makes me feel really good inside, even though I know, like you said, it's an important position. So show was great last week. Had a good week in Arizona with some R&R, but happy to be back talking defensive line today. And before we were on air here, I was like, man, I'm so glad Ben Fennell is here to talk some defensive line because, as we mentioned, it is not the most inspiring group, but if there is anyone that is going to point to some players that will get us excited, it is the great Ben Fennell. And Ben, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, guys. And don't be so slighting to that offensive tackle group, all right? Offensive tackles, guards, defensive tackles, you always got to keep allocating to the trenches in there. They're not the sexiest groups. Everybody wants to talk about all the accent pieces and the decor and all the outside stuff. You got to put in the foundations. You got to have a really good cellar. You got to have all that concrete in the basement, those load-bearing walls, the ones that do all the dirty work.
Yeah, one thing I like about watching the stuff you put out, and Ben's great, guys. Follow him on Twitter. I just had his handle up, and I'll throw it back up here for you guys in just a second. Ben Fennell _NFL. He throws all kinds of stuff there, doing some stuff now for NFL Films, works at The Athletic during the season and does the film room. But what I appreciate the most about your stuff, Ben, is the willingness to go outside of the groupthink. The example I can give is I know you did a show on Game On, actually, and you were talking to Eli and Zach on Open Book about how you wanted them to re-sign Aaron Jones. And that is very obviously not something that is a common thought amongst, especially Twitter nowadays either. But the other thing that I can point out that I think you do really well is point out what players do well and what they can do as opposed to what they can't do. And I think that's a good foundation on which to start things. So tell us a little bit while I went in there. I know I said The Athletic and Films, but you are a man of many talents. So where all do you find yourself doing things these days?
Yeah, definitely corner in the freelance market, filling my year up with a lot of different gigs. I work for ESPN College Football, although I did not this past season. But I typically would go out on the road each weekend to a different college football game with Greg McElroy and my ESPN crew, which works great for all my draft coverage, just going to see those players up close. Work in the Eagles media department the last 5-6 years as well, working on Eagles game plan, The Athletic. The second that season ends, I go over to NFL Films, start working on all that offseason stuff. So the Senior Bowl, the Combine, the draft, take a month or two off in the summer to work on my tour card and do it all again. And started initially at NFL Films, working on the show Playbook. That's no longer on NFL Network, unfortunately, but that's kind of how this whole animal started and keeps things fresh, keeps things new, a lot of different jobs and a little time off. So it's a work hard, play hard balance, you know?
What a great show it was.
Yeah. No, it was, especially for nerds like us.
But it's crazy that the NFL Network exists right now without a show dedicated to all 22. And when I worked on the show, the head of the network really didn't believe in the X's and O's. He didn't think that's what fans wanted. The new head of the network, a little bit more of a believer. So it's starting to come back a little bit in doses, but I'd still love to see a through and through show dedicated to X's and O's and all 22.
Absolutely. And speaking of all 22, speaking of X's and O's, and Jacob already pointed out that one thing I do admire about you, and I try to emulate myself, is I don't always like pointing out. There are plenty of things about prospects I don't like when I'm talking about them, but I do appreciate how you always just point out, this is what this guy does well. This is what I think he can do to be successful. And something that I think got a lot of Packers panties in a bunch this last week was Kevin King being re-signed to a 1-year deal. So then Kevin King back in Green Bay. What's your level of concern with him being a starter again next year? And what do you think he can do now in Joe Barry's new scheme that might give us a little bit of hope that he can kind of, recapture some of the magic that he had in 2019?
Well, I'll kind of tackle that backwards. The new scheme with Joe Barry, I hate to disappoint Packers fans. This is going to be pretty similar to the scheme that they just played with Mike Pettin. Primarily zone coverage, rather conservative approach, keep it in front of you. It's a little stressful on certain positions like the safeties as opposed to the linebackers. There's going to be a lot of completions allowed. I don't know if Packers fans are going to love that on third and mediums, but it just is the way they want to play defense. No defense covers everything. This is their philosophical approach. It's hard to play defense in this day and age of football. I kind of like this aspect. Prevent explosive plays, be opportunistic occasionally on third downs, maybe get a stop in the red zone. That's the formula. Joe Barry also had two very talented players in Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey, elites at their position. So we'll see what it looks like without that caliber of players, although Kenny Clark and Jair are still pretty good. But moving on to Kevin King, these players are just so tough to evaluate because they're so inconsistent. For every bad play, I could find you the exact same situation of him making that. And that's what makes him such an enigma, is the inconsistency, whether it's tackling, technique, ball skills, effort, and then the inconsistency with his availability. So that makes these types of players almost impossible to evaluate because they've shown you the good and then they break your heart with the bad. And just when you're ready to trust them again, they break your heart. And that back and forth is mind-boggling. For better or worse, solidify yourself. Come up with some consistency, not because I want to see Kevin King struggle, but then that gives the Packers a better snapshot on the player, the evaluation, what to pay him, his, projection to the future. And right now, looking at the free agent market and the need for clearly a corner too, he was the best option out there. And I think the dollar amount was friendly for both sides. And, I'm rooting for him to work out, and hopefully we get more of the yay rather than the nay.
Yeah, and I think that's the whole thing that kind of killed me this week is like Kevin King. My whole point was this team is talented enough to win a Super Bowl with Kevin King as your starting corner. Is that ideal? Is that what you want to go into 2021 with? Probably not, but you could do a lot worse with your second corner opposite of Jair Alexander than Kevin King. And the point I was kind of trying to make is everyone points to Kevin King in that NFC Championship game. And did he play well? No, he didn't. But the Packers had opportunities to win that game still. That it wouldn't have mattered if, after Jair, both of his interceptions, if the Packers would have done anything on offense. And those guys don't get the blame at all. And I don't think that's necessarily that fair. But I think Kevin King as your second corner, like this team can win a Super Bowl. And I think they're not done at that position. I think they're going to look at the cornerback position, which we've already covered on this show. But you saw Goody was in South Carolina today watching J.C. Horn. And maybe he was there to watch Shi Smith. But these GMs only have a certain amount of pro days they can go to in person. So this stuff matters. The fact that he was going there to watch J.C. Horn, I think that tells you the Packers are very in at the cornerback position. But like you said, Ben, let's root for Kevin King to be successful, right? Because his success is the Packers' success. So that's definitely something that I think we are all hoping to see. And I hope he proves us wrong. I hope he solidifies himself in the positive way. And I think what you had said too is you'll see him make a play and then you'll see him do the exact same thing wrong. And one thing that I tweeted out this week was the incredible interception that he had at Washington, right? Where he is, he's finding the ball, one-handed interception in the end zone. You can almost do that screen grab, do the exact same screen grab with the Tampa Bay game where he was, a yard and a half short. Exact same form, exact same play if he would have made it, but obviously we know the outcome.
I still have in memory burned his interception against the 49ers. I think it was CJ Beathard, but that was one where he was kind of retreating, found the ball late, and it fell right into his lap there. I think it was on Monday night or something. But the last point about corners, kind of for the fans there, tell me who the press lockdown corner was for the Tampa Bay Bucks this year. Tell me who the press lockdown corner was for the Chiefs 2 years ago. Exactly. Yeah. You can win Super Bowls without an elite alpha, Pro Bowl, whatever term you want to call corner. You can win without that. So the fact that the Packers have Jair Alexander already, and now we're kind of, dissecting what does cornerback 2 mean for the collective team. You can win without elite cornerbacks if you play the right schemes. And I think Green Bay has the right scheme to protect corners as well.
So that's a good start. The other polarizing portion of this offseason has been to sign Kevin King. They created some cap space by getting Mason Crosby and Adrian Amos's contract redone. The one contract they have not touched is Aaron Rodgers. And the question I have for you is, I know it's kind of gone back and forth. If you had asked me right after the draft, I would have told you 100% chance Jordan Love becomes the starter at some point. Then the season happens and he's the league's most valuable player and is one touchdown pass away from playing in the Super Bowl and maybe winning it. I mean, looking at the way Kansas City played in that game, obviously it's a different matchup, but potentially winning a Super Bowl. It's interesting to see what they're doing with his contract. Now I would say it's like a 60-40, 50-50 kind of chance. What is your assessment on what the Packers are doing with that contract and how they're evaluating Rodgers and his play as he ages going forward?
Well, this one's super easy for me because I have no idea. I don't pretend to be a cap expert this time of year, which those seem to come out of the weeds and dissecting all this dead money and stuff. I kind of have my niche. I don't go into the numbers too often, but what I do know is it's kind of a messy situation because they restructured last offseason. So you can only push so much money to the future before that comes to a head. So if they want to restructure this contract, it's going to take a massive contract overhaul and probably an extension with it for it to make sense. If you're just trying to move his money around, that means his cap hit next year is going to be about $50 million at this point. It's already 39, pushing 40. How much more money can you push to the back end of the deal there? So I know they want to work out something long-term. I'm sure Rodgers wants to work out something long-term, but these types of situations with aging quarterbacks, as we've seen before, very messy when you get to dollars and cents. You always want to have that backdoor out in case they, crap the bed or their arthritis acts up late in their career. But it's also very tricky. You don't want to pay a quarterback off of an MVP season. Just like we had no desire to pay Aaron Jones after a 19 touchdown season. So I think we got Aaron Jones for a great value. We didn't pay him after that year. We paid him after this year. Same with Aaron Rodgers. I don't want to pay him after an MVP season because that might set the team back for the next couple of years for how much that's actually worth. But in a collective sense, I don't really know what's going on with the Aaron Rodgers contract situation.
Yeah, I think you're making too much sense for for Twitter, man, and for people that like to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, I just pulled that out of my butt. I made up a lot of that stuff. I have no idea collectively. I know obviously they restructured last year. I'm just talking it out, making sense of it. It's one of those things that I don't try to follow as it's happening. It's like, give me the news at the end of the finish line. I'll read it and put it to bed. But to go through the day-to-day and the speculation of numbers, it's exhausting and it's kind of tough to do.
Yeah, and I know, a lot of people will say, well, if they don't commit to Rodgers now, what does that mean? Is Jordan Love going to be the starter in 2022 because they didn't commit to Rodgers? And it's just like, we're not in the room, man. We have no idea, right? And Rodgers is, like you said, he's going to be 38 next year. And if you can go on
account for variable change. Aaron Rodgers a year ago, we've had this conversation, Jake, and I know you agree to at least some degree, Ben. There is a good argument to be made after 2019. So not this past season, but the year before, that Rodgers was declining. There was at least an argument that you could say like, okay, that makes sense. This past season, that's the best football he's played in 6 years. So I think, what you're saying, the Packers are trying to hedge their bet, so to speak, which is exactly what the organizations should be doing. Because if you think about it, the examples I use, look at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Can Ben Roethlisberger play anymore? No, not really. But they have no choice but to run him out there as their starting quarterback because they pushed so much of his money into the now that they couldn't do anything about it. The same goes with Drew Brees in New Orleans. Brees was very I can't remember. I think it was Jay Glazer said on a Fox pregame that it wasn't. It was Peter Schrager on an NFL Network pregame. Sorry about that. But that they were all surprised that he came back for this season. And it was something they were even kind of quietly maybe hoping that he didn't because they thought his arm was shot. And it was. And that's what the Packers are trying to avoid. Now, Rodgers is a better player than Roethlisberger and Brees and more talented than both of those guys. But that being said, what if he regresses to 2019 form next season and has those issues with deep ball accuracy where it's just gone and not trusting the offense, running all over the place, playing schoolyard ball, doing that kind of stuff that hurt the offense, quite frankly, in the last 3-4 years before this season. I think that's what the Packers are trying to do as much as they can. Now, that being said, at some point, they're going to have to make some kind of decision with Rodgers and his contract. I don't think no decision means that Jordan Love is the starter automatically in 2022. If they made a decision for 2022 in 2020, that's bad process all the way around.
And I think the conundrum with this offense is it's turned complete 180 into a quarterback-friendly system. And Aaron Rodgers just game managed his way to an MVP. He was an elite game manager. That is what it is. It's a quarterback-friendly offense. But the conundrum, can other quarterbacks run this offense this effective? Should you pay a quarterback in a quarterback-friendly system? If it's quarterback-friendly, it should be translatable from multiple talents, multiple arms. We're taking less pressure off the quarterback position, which I think in Green Bay, we all wanted to see how much, Aaron Rodgers had to scratch and claw and put the team on his back for 4 or 5 years under McCarthy just to get wins and explosive plays. It's refreshing to see him accept the system. But with that being said, does that mean somebody else can then run the system this effectively? And this is kind of the cat and mouse with talent versus scheme. And I keep coming back to the why. Why would you draft Jordan Love? Was it the value too good on your board? Was he the best available? Did you really consider the future? Were you worried about your aging quarterback's performance and obviously your commitment to him in later years? My counterpoint to that, Tampa Bay went and got a 40-something-year-old quarterback in the offseason. Indianapolis went and got a 40-something-year-old quarterback. The Saints had a 40-something-year-old quarterback. The Steelers had an injured quarterback. None of those teams made any moves in the drafts to get quarterbacks or find their guy of the future. Why? They wanted to win now. And that's where I think the issue with the Packers in the selection of a quarterback, trading up in the first round to say, you know what, we want to make sure we're always thinking about the future. There's so many other teams that said, you know what, don't worry about the future. Let's worry about now. And it just seems like the Packers are never in a full throttle for now. And it's safe, but it's also frustrating in that same conversation.
Yeah, I think you just hit on almost every single point that has been argued via Twitter this year, and really well said as well. But let's move on from the quarterback position, because we could talk about Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love and what's going to happen there all episode, and it wouldn't be a waste of an episode. But moving on to the Packers, this is the defensive line positional group preview that we have for this Packers team and for the draft that is coming up. So let's look at the Packers roster as it stands right now, Ben. What are some things, I guess, you would say, hey, you know what, I like this about the defensive line group. I'm going to hang my hat on that. What is something that concerns you about this group? And then what are some things that give you hope for this defensive line group?
Well, firstly, I guess let me ask, are you including the edge rushers, defensive ends in this conversation?
No, we're not. Just okay. your front, 5 tech, 1 tech, all those guys.
Okay. All right. Collectively, I love Kenny Clark. I think you guys know my infatuation with him. I think he's an outstanding player for what he's asked to do. Collectively, the interior defensive tackle group of the Green Bay Packers, I think, is a bottom 5 across the league. I don't think it's exciting. I think it's uninspiring. I don't think there's enough playmakers. I don't think there's enough talent. Dean Lowry, Tyler Lancaster, I'm not sure they have a place anymore on this team. They're really just first down run pluggers. They have no twitch, no explosiveness, no disrupting aspect to their game. So I want to see more guys with length, first step explosiveness, and guys that can disrupt more. Kingsley Kiki is a nice 3-tech piece and sub packages. We'll see where his game develops in the next year or two. But in a collective sense, this is one of the least inspiring defensive tackle rooms in the NFL. And considering Joe Barry just had Aaron Donald and just had Michael Brockers, which is one of the more dominant tandems in the league. And Michael Brockers is a completely underrated player in this league since being a top 10 pick at LSU like 10 years ago. He does a lot of dirty work. He's really that Kenny Clark in Joe Barry's system. Who's going to be the Aaron Donald? Who's going to be that quick twitch guy to squeeze in the backfields and make plays? I don't really see it on this team. And I think that's why they've relied so often on moving Za'Darius around, lining him up over guards, walking him around pre-snap in the A gaps on first downs to get some sort of disruptive aspect to the front. So I want to see that come a little bit more naturally from a defensive lineman.
Yeah, I think that's when I was starting. I've been doing a little series on Game On of doing just putting players in categories of elite players, good players, prospects, and replacement level players. And this group is Kenny Clark, an elite player. Kingsley Kiki is still a prospect at this point, and everybody else is a replacement level player. I think that you could plug in a lot of guys, and that's somebody who I might like Dean Lowry a little bit more than the average human, but I think that's fair to say, yeah, definitely a replacement level player. Just a really underwhelming group. And the hard part that you're looking at now is this group in the draft is a little underwhelming as well. It's not, there isn't a Kenny Clark at the end of the first round that they're going to be able to grab. So my question to you is it as bad as it appears, or are there some guys that you're like, okay, I have a little hope there, a little hope there?
There's some hope, but it's not a top-heavy class, which the top-heavy aspect of draft classes really represent the class. And without a true blue-chip name, and there's a chance the top 20 picks, there are no interior defensive tackles, and there's a good chance there's no edges in maybe the top 15 picks. It's really not a top-heavy group in either position, but defensive tackle-wise, I think there's some intriguing day 2 options. But day 2 is when a lot of these sexy skill players are going to go off the board too. So I don't think anyone's going to warrant that first round buzz or that first round selection at 29. And then I don't know if you want to wait till day 3. I think the Packers are going to have a lot of options on day 2 and a lot of different needs to kind of address. But yeah, we could go through some names, certainly. I think there's enough intriguing options, just not super deep, not super top heavy.
Yeah. So the first question and the big one that we have in here is Christian Barmore from Alabama. He had a big end of the season for Alabama, really came on there and then had some nice numbers put up at his pro day, everything like that. What do you see from him as he might be, you just mentioned there may not be a defensive lineman picked in the top 15 or 20. He might be the only defensive lineman picked in the first round as a whole. So let's start there.
Yeah, it seems pretty safe. He'll be the lone, if there's going to be any. I think the Davion Nixon roller coaster has kind of gone back down to where he should be, which is kind of a third round player. But Christian Barmore is really interesting because only a redshirt sophomore, rather inexperienced, didn't play a whole lot on early downs for Alabama, which is kind of strange. A more of a sub-package defensive tackle with a good first step, more of a squeeze through the gap, get up field type, which is completely different than any of these Alabama defensive tackles over the last 5, 6, 7 years. From the Ashawn Robinsons, Jerron Reeds, Jonathan Allens, Paynes. Those are all square stance, 2-gappers that lock out, read the play at the line of scrimmage, shed the block, and go make a play. All of those guys, incredibly stout, incredibly technically sound. That's not Christian Barmore. Christian Barmore is a disruptor. He's a guy that wants to get upfield, get into gaps, and that's why he is a sexy pass rusher. That's why he does play on third downs, but he's a bit of a liability on early downs because of that rawness, because of that lack of technique, and just being a stout, disciplined run defender. He's more of that kind of single gap defensive tackle, which is different than the Alabama players that have come out lately. I think his collective tape is not as good as some of his highlights. I'm not as high on Christian Barmore, and you could put Davion Nixon in that same conversation because they're kind of similar players, just maybe a round or two apart. But I think their flash plays are way too few and far between from their regular down-to-down play. But it's not a deep group. He's a young player. He's explosive, and he's ascending. So that gets the NFL excited.
Smells like a Brian Gutekunst pick too.
Well, I wanted to ask that, Ben. So pick 29 comes in, Christian Barmore. How do you feel? Right. What is your initial gut reaction if that is the pick?
Well, I think that's going to be a nice piece to pair with Kenny Clark. I have to envision he'll be that three-tech disruptor, that Aaron Donald presence in Joe Barry's defensive front. I'm glad to see we kept Jerry Montgomery on that defensive line to coach, which I think is a really good coach. I think I would be a little disappointed considering my kind of passion for a tackle starter, tackle depth, tackle competition, adding more weapons around Aaron Rodgers, adding cornerback depth, more athletic linebacker, edge rushers. I think there's just other collective needs besides that defensive tackle room, which is strange because I just talked about it in a pretty uninspiring way, calling them a bottom 5 group. So everybody's saying if they're a bottom 5, why wouldn't we improve it? Go get a better player. Just not sure that's the right player with the right draft capital, in my opinion.
So let me piggyback on that too. Is, my thought on everything is you shouldn't just, in the draft in general, just more of a philosophical question, I suppose, is you don't just pick players just to pick them. My thought when we get to, wherever the Packers are picking is pick an A level player. So if you have a board and it's A, B, C, if you have an A player at a position that maybe you don't need. So for example, let's just use Jordan Love as last year's example. The Packers clearly had him as an A quarterback, as opposed to a B wide receiver like Michael Pittman Jr. or Chase Claypool or somebody like that. Is that generally how you view this as well, in terms of, instead of just picking a defensive tackle to say you picked a defensive tackle, would you rather than pick somebody at a different spot because you think that's a better overall player?
Yeah, and that's what these really popular vertical boards are in draft rooms, where you kind of stack players top to bottom with all the tiers down the left or the right-hand side, and you start to put your elite prospects up and tier them back down. And if you are picking, that's a lot of times how your best player available is found. Not necessarily a straight list, but they're in buckets. So if you have somebody with a potential Pro Bowl first-year starter bucket and he's the last one up in that tier across the board, that's your best player available. So it's all about weighing that positional value, that positional depth. But the defensive tackle class, would be really interested to see who the NFL views as an elite prospect, who they think can be a potential Pro Bowler. And I think there's some more intriguing options that bring better value in the draft on day 2 and day 3 that I think can do comparable roles to, the Barmores and the Nixons that are getting that early round love.
Well, and Ben, talk to me about Milton Williams out of Louisiana Tech as a kid that, he had some buzz when people started talking about his athletic profile, but then you turn on the tape and that's, I thought he absolutely just jumps off the screen as far as a guy with, just flexibility in his lower body, with the hands to jolt people. He's not the longest guy and he's not the heaviest guy in the pants, but you look at a guy probably on day 2, and is that someone that I guess would excite you a little bit more than like a Barmore in round 1? And like, is this kid going to get pushed up and overdrafted? Because he does, I think, in my opinion, he's got a little bit more upside than some of these other guys. So is he going to go higher than what he really should?
Yeah, I think day 2 is still a little rich for Milton Williams, but I would not be shocked to literally see him the first pick on day 3, maybe even have a team trade up overnight to go get him. Excuse me. He's really interesting because he's a hybrid player. He doesn't really have a positional fit. Is he a D tackle? Is he a DN? He played at about 270. The second the season ended, he put on 15 pounds. So you kind of saw where he wanted to go with his trajectory, be more of a true defensive tackle, more of a true 3-tech. But he is an absolute disruptor through and through. He could disrupt with power and strength. He can disrupt by squeezing into gaps. He could disrupt by shedding offensive linemen with quick moves with his hands. And his pro day was obviously silly in some of the numbers he put up. So that definitely checks out. It's just a matter of where you view him positionally. He could be a guy that still plays some edge on early downs and slides inside in some sub packages. I would love a player of that type of profile to work into the defensive line room just to get more of a diverse skill set with the other players, with the Clarks and the Northwestern boys. No hate against Pat Fitzgerald and the Wildcats out there, Lowry and Lancaster, but just getting more of a diversified portfolio in that room. And I think Milton Williams would be a really nice pick.
Jake, I know that the next bit of question that we have was kind of your idea, and I think it's a really cool concept. So I want to let you kind of lead that discussion.
Sure. Yeah. I think so. Whenever you go through your draft work, you watch probably as many guys as anyone. So I
Are we
really
putting the D tackles to bed?
we're putting the D tackles to bed because they're probably the next question I'm going to ask you. I will almost guarantee you will not say a D tackle because
well, really quick. Let me give one last elevator speech on some D tackles here. All right, the day 2 guys I think have great value. I'm just afraid for the Packers to take one while skipping corner or tackle or receiver. But Levi Onwuzurike, Osa Odigizua, J2 Faley, Tommy Togiai, I would much rather them on round 2 or round 3 than Barmore in round 1. And then there's these guys that are completely, crap in the bed in their approach. They're not the longest guys. They're not the most explosive guys. But we've seen the squatty guys win. We've seen them win in Green Bay with the Mike Daniels of the world, Dante Stills, Jalen Twyman, Mustafa Johnson. They're all about 6 feet tall. They don't look good. They don't look the part the NFL wants, but they are disruptive. They have quick first steps. They get into backfields. They have tons of pass rushing production. I think they're going to be really interesting third down defensive tackles in the NFL. And then the wild cards, what I call the 5-star club, the guys that everybody wanted coming out of high school, but didn't really produce in the college field. And NFL pays attention to the high school star rating because they think that's untapped potential. I'm talking about big Marvin Wilson and Bobby Brown III at Texas A&M. That's all I got to say on those two. There's some scouts in the NFL community that think their best football is ahead of them. So if somebody maybe reaches for one of those guys around 3 or round 4, that's why. They didn't really produce in their colleges. I think we know about Marvin, and Bobby Brown's kind of an underdog right now, but not if you scouted them out of high school because everybody wanted them. But I call them the 5-star club because they have talent. Why wasn't it tapped in college? You got to figure that out.
That's interesting. Okay. And I think you keep mentioning day 2. I think the sour spot, you can't really call it the sweet spot. The Packers have seemed to like the 3rd round defensive tackle, and the last couple that they picked have been Montrevious Adams and Kyrie Thornton. So you're hoping for
give me Chauncey Golson in round 3 out of Iowa. Chauncey Golson, he can play inside, outside, incredible motor. He's got great length. I think Iowa looks pretty good in some Green Bay green and gold out there. We'll welcome him with open arms.
There you go. So you get out of that bad luck spot that you've had with Montrevious and Kyrie Thornton specifically. Jake, I'm sorry, I keep cutting you off. Go ahead.
That was perfect because I was just complimenting on Ben on how he watches an incredible amount of dudes, and he just listed about 20 guys in 5 minutes. So that was phenomenal. But then when you go through your film, you've got this Rolodex in your head now. And I think it's always really interesting to go back and just look at your favorite film session. Who is a guy that you can talk about, and it doesn't need to be D-line, any position, when you just say, damn, that was the most fun I had watching a football player this draft season?
All right. And full disclosure, I saw this on the rundown coming in, and this gets asked quite often on some shows and some radio hits here and there. And it's very general. It's very open-ended. Jacob, few things give me more anxiety than trying to pinpoint a topic from an open-ended draft discussion. So I'm going to ask you. Yeah. So I love the generalness of it, but you got to lead me to water a little bit. There's some guys I love. You want to talk some gadget players, some blocking tight ends, slot receivers, the relentless edge rushers, athletic undersized centers. I get passionate and excited about a lot of different avenues. So you steer me a direction and I got you.
Let's talk about most dominant offensive weapon in this year's draft class is who?
Most dominant offensive weapon in this year's draft class. Well, I think there's a lot of yak receivers in this class, whether it's the Rondell Moores, Elijah Moores, Amari Rodgers of the world. All these guys that generate easy offense, I think are going to fit perfectly into the NFL. I love Kenneth Gainwell out of Memphis. Guy that's played some time in the slot. He's played in the backfield, really took over that Tony Pollard role for that Memphis offense. Unfortunately opted out of 2020, but really good kid off the field as well, takes care of his autistic brother. I just think these pass-catching running backs are very, very dangerous. So whether it's him or whether it's Demetric Felton, which everybody saw him at the Senior Bowl and said, wow, this guy can catch passes. He was a 4-star receiver coming into UCLA. This is not a conventional running back, but that's okay. And everybody's wondering, Rondell Moore, you're 5'7". What do we do with you? Give him a running back number. That's what you should do with him. Put him in the backfield. Are you allowed to catch passes back there? Alvin Kamara certainly does. Christian McCaffrey certainly does. Aaron Jones certainly did for, a couple years for the Packers. So I love all these kind of gadget players. And tomorrow we have 2 really intriguing pro days. Jalen Darden out of North Texas, one of the darlings of this draft. Do fast. He is as quick and as lightning as it gets in this group. And D. Eskridge out of Western Michigan was a receiver, flipped the corner, back to receiver. Explosive as it gets in this draft. These guys might be flirting with some 4.29s tomorrow. So really interesting players, but in a collective sense, get one of these yards after catch demons to the Packers. They get the ball out of Rodgers' hands now. A lot of bubbles, a lot of RPOs, a lot of quick game stuff. Now let's see somebody that's dynamic with the ball in their hands and see what happens. Maybe they could take that 2-yard catch into an 80-yard. So I would love to see just got a little bit more of an influx of explosiveness into this Packers offense.
I love it. I love the idea of the gadget. It's something they haven't had since prime Randall Cobb. I mean, it's been a while since.
And Jacob, I went back. I think it was like last summer. I went back and watched some Randall Cobb in like his heyday, his first couple of years. He was unreal. Completely took me back, but I guess I didn't appreciate him maybe in the time. We were a little diluted watching, Jermichael Finley and the receivers and Jordy. There was a lot to go around. Randall Cobb was dynamic and an absolute weapon, yards after the catch, double moves, whatever you needed. He was a really good player, and I don't think we've had anything similar to that since he left.
No. And I would love to see something to where you see as much two back as the Packers ran last year. And with Jones coming back and Dillon being around, there's a possibility where the Packers could use, 3 guys like that. And like you mentioned, it doesn't have to be a slot receiver. It can be a gadget running back like that. Kenneth Gainwell is somebody that I am absolutely all for Green Bay still taking, even with the presence of, I don't really care what position you call them. People say you can't carry X amount of running backs or X amount of receivers. They're pass catchers. They're playmakers. Put the ball in their hands and let them go. And as much as they want to run that, without Jamal Williams now, if you can get a more explosive version of Williams back there with Dillon, I mean, a couple names that were mentioned here, you didn't mention them, but I like both of these guys too. Jamar Jefferson, Javion Hawkins, there's guys like that too. I think putting those guys in there as well. One question we have, and I know we got a couple Iowa fans in here. I'm not going to try and butcher this guy's name, but Mr. Smith Marset out of Iowa.
Smith Marset. He's a really interesting player, and I think he's just in that kind of day 3 tier of these gadget players. I know he had a really good pro day over there with Brandon Smith, which Brandon Smith's really interesting considering how well he tested and doesn't play any special teams. But just trying to find my Smith Marset notes here. But yeah, at 6'1", 183, the end arounds, the jet sweeps, do whatever you can to get the ball in his hands. All right. If Nate Stanley's inaccurate, great. Hand the ball to your weapons if that's what you have to do. Double moves, quick games, screens. Reminds me a lot of a Ted Ginn type of player, or maybe a Brandon Tate type of player. But this is exactly what we're looking for in this Packers offense. Whether it's any of those running backs, whether it's any of those gadget players, slot receivers, returner types like Smith Marset. Just love to see somebody be more dangerous on the perimeter with the ball in their hands. And I know Packers fans are probably scratching their head and saying, what about Devontae Adams? That really isn't Devontae's game. He's a dynamic route runner, dynamic pass catcher, not that dangerous after the catch. And that's okay. It's tough to check every box as a skill player. So I'd love to see somebody with a little bit more yak ability. And after hearing, this is kind of a very big tangent, after hearing Steve Sarkisian, the former offensive coordinator at Alabama, now the head coach at Texas, talk about his scheme, how heavy involved it was in the run game, how heavy involved it was with RPOs. I'm this close to moving Aaron Jones to the slot receiver position and just pounding defenses with A.J. Dillon this year. I'm ready to see A.J. Dillon with 250 carries and absolutely wear down opposing defenses. With Devontae, with Aaron Jones, with hopefully another weapon in that offense, that's the balance I think you want. And to hear Sarkisian talk about run the ball, run the ball, run the ball, if you want to take away the run, we'll RPO you to death. This is Matt LaFleur's philosophy. So now I'm just thinking in Alabama terms. Let's get some big people moving offensive linemen. Let's get a wear you down running back, and let's smash some defenses. And then if you want to take away the run, that's when Rodgers starts slicing it up to Devontae and Aaron Jones and So I think they have a really good kind of thunder and lightning combo out there. One more piece on that offense, skill player wise, and I think they got something.
Yeah, and something I think you can point to is, just to go on that point, I'll let Jake talk, but the Rams game in the postseason, the way they used both of those backs, where it was crazy. If I noticed it, I'm quite certain you did. But when they brought Jones in motion, you could watch the linebackers, because they threw that pass a bunch against Chicago 2 weeks prior. And you just watch the linebackers go with them. And they were like, okay, we're just going to give it to AJ. Here's 6 yards of crack. And once you get Dylan going on stuff like that, I think you mentioned another guy like that in the offense. I think that this offense has a chance to, it's crazy. They were the best offense in the NFL last year statistically, and have a chance to be even better in 2021.
All those schematic elements, the motion and all the pre-snap stuff, all the eye candy for opposing defenses, especially those second level defenders, those linebackers, was just absolutely brilliant. It put defenses in binds, and at the end of the day, they're human beings. Make them think. Defenders don't always want to think out there. Make them think, and you just saw how easy offense was. And it's just really exciting to see Rodgers trust it, stay in the pocket, play within structure, and he could really play with this scheme, with this formula for as long as he wants.
And Aaron Rodgers highlights come from where again?
Right in the middle of that pocket.
That's right. All right, Jake, I've cut you off 3 times. Go ahead.
Oh, no, you're I'm so glad someone brought up Smith Marset, because that's one of my draft crushes this year. I love Smith Marset on day 3. And you talk about the dynamic piece to this offense and what they were able to do to get people to move, to get the linebackers to creep up and just open up some of those holes for Aaron Rodgers to pick apart. They're doing it with guys like Darius Shepard and, Tyler Irving, and guys that shouldn't necessarily make you think. You know what I mean? They're like, if they give him the ball, whatever. So get someone in that role that, man, if you can get a Smith Marset in space, he'll make you pay. And, the next thing we're going to get to is the thrift store prospect, where you get to who are some guys, and I want you to focus specifically on the slot type guys, the gadget type guys in this class, because I think that's a fascinating way to kind of look at those guys and say day 1, day 2, day 3, and what type of value can you get these guys at if you miss out on them. And Smith Marset, we talked about this yesterday on the Arrowhead Pride podcast, and I said my thrift store guy was Diami Brown is a day 2 guy, and Smith Marset is discount Diami. And that's who you can get on day 3. I think they're very similar players. But I want to kick it back to you, Ben, and focusing on, what we were just talking about. Those skill type guys that make you nervous when they're in space. And who are some guys, as you just kind of go through the draft, who are some guys that you think, man, okay, here's a top level guy, but I might like Jalen Darden the most on day 3 because I really like him and people just aren't talking about him. So kind of walk us through that. And who are some guys that you can think you can get later at a discount that compare to some of the top guys in this class?
All right, so you might not believe me, but my day 3 steals, Amir Smith Marset was the first name I had written down here, and he was my only receiver I had listed on this group. I had Brady Christensen of BYU, Derek Barnes, linebacker Purdue, Jacoby Stevens at LSU. I think is like a poor man's Owusu Koromoa, Jamian Sherwood, Inspector Gadget limb safety from Auburn. But let's talk about some slots. I love Jalen Darden. I have a huge crush on him. I'm afraid after his pro day, he's not going to make it till day 3. But looking at some of these other players in the draft here, I think Tony, Rondale Moore, Elijah Moore, all top 50 guys. I think Darden, Amari Rodgers, probably in that day 2 group right now. And then day 3, if Smith Marset, Shi Smith out of South Carolina, is a really dynamic slot receiver, had some quarterback issues. He was also always buried on that receiver depth chart with Brian Edwards and Deebo Samuel. Surprised he didn't transfer out of there. And then the Tutu Atwells of the world, which are more of the Deshaun Jackson over-the-top type at 175. Probably not a guy you want the ball in his hands, taking too many hits. Marquez Stevenson out of Houston may be a better option there. I think he's a little bit tougher with the ball in his hands. 2019 was a really good year in the Big Ten for receivers. You had Chris Olave, Rashad Bateman, and Tyler Johnson, and the Iowa guys played well. You know who led the Big Ten in yards after catch? That was Walt Filer out of Indiana. A lot of people aren't talking about him. He's a really dynamic slot receiver as well. Again, quarterback issues. He could carve up Sean Wade, and the quarterback put it in the 3rd row. So you have to always kind of take that stuff into consideration as well. Really interesting player out of South Florida, or excuse me, Central Florida. 2 players in this class, 1,000 rushing, 1,000 receiving. We all know Travis Etienne. He's been at Clemson forever, a million touchdowns. Otis Anderson at Central Florida. He's played in the slot. He's played in the backfield. But the issue is he's 175 pounds. He's 180 pounds. You just don't know what to do with a guy at that size. Same thing with Puka Williams at Kansas. Dynamic player, explosive. Some people think he'll be a better gadget type of player, play him out in the slot, get the ball in his hands. But he's 175 pounds. I just don't know if that type of profile is going to fit what the Packers would really want out of that slot position. The big question
to cut you off, Ben.
Yeah,
did you know that Puka Williams does not have toes on his left foot?
You know, I think I heard that 2 years ago. I did a Kansas game against Oklahoma, and they, for some reason, they were messing with Kenneth Murray pregame, which is not a good thing to do in college because he murdered them. But I think I remember that. I'll have to put that in his report. Does that move him up my board or down my board?
I don't know, man. I just think it's, that's fantastic. That he's that dynamic of an athlete.
Right. But 2 really interesting players that I love. I just have no idea where they're going to go in the draft. Amari Rodgers. That tough, almost running back playing slot receiver for Clemson, catches everything. Maybe not the most dynamic athlete, but a really tough player. And Amon-Ra St. Brown at USC had his pro day today, started to get a little bit more buzz. He has some of the most diverse receiver production I think I've ever scouted. From winning inside, outside, put him in the backfield, hide him with end-around stuff. He could win quick game, RPO, intermediate, down the field, at the catch point, after the catch. Oh, yeah, we're short on running backs one week. Great, let's put him in the backfield and just run outside zone. 30-yard touchdown against Colorado 2 years ago. He's a really interesting player. There's some guys that just have no idea where they're going to go in the draft. So I have really good snapshots on a lot of prospects. I just don't know the pecking order and the stacking order of where to expect these guys to go off the board, which makes it exciting and makes it a little, angsty because you don't really know, is he a early day 2 guy or is he going to go mid day 3? And so many prospects like that, like the Walker Littles of the world out of Stanford, didn't play for 2 years. He'd be a 1st round pick and I'll be like, yep. He'd be a 5th round pick and I'll be like, yep. And there's so many guys like that in this draft, which makes it fun and makes it kind of unpredictable.
We're running a little short on time, so let's wrap here. Ben, I've got a question. I'm going to put you in the general manager's chair. Ben Fennell has just been hired as the general manager of the Green Bay Packers. I'm not going to ask you to pick.
Business card's already pretty wordy here, right? We're going to have to cut some things out.
All right, so we can cut some stuff. That's fine. But I'm not going to ask you to pick somebody specific or anything like that. I'm going to ask, when it comes to football, you've been around so much, college, pro, everything like that. What is your general philosophy in terms of building a team? How does it start? What do you value? Those kinds of things.
That's a great question. Obviously, I love general toughness. I don't love finesse players. I love you got to have guys that love the game of football. I think when you get guys that love the game of football, you just get a different level of commitment to the game of football, not only on Sundays, but during the week as well, during the off season as well. There are people that just take it more seriously. But it's hard to find that before you get your hands on these players. You usually don't find out players don't love football until it's too late, kind of a thing. But general toughness, physicality, I do not like finesse. So I want guys that are willing to battle, willing to go through people, willing to, battle, willing to fight through competition, willing to handle adversity, whether it's in competition or between the downs, all that kind of mental toughness stuff. I absolutely love in building my roster with. That's a really good question. That's probably something we could talk much longer about.
Absolutely. He's Ben Fennell. You can catch him on Twitter at @BenFennell_NFL. Subscribe to The Athletic for his Packers film room during the season and all kinds of stuff with NFL films throughout the offseason as well. So, and obviously Twitter, there's all kinds of stuff that goes through on there as well. And I learn something new anytime he tweets, and I could listen to him talk football all day long. Ben, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to talking to you again sometime soon. And then we have Jake Morley as well. You could follow him on Twitter. He's at Jacob Morley. And then you could follow myself. I'm at Jacob Westorf. Thank you guys for tuning into the Gold Zone. We'll be back next week talking off-ball inside linebackers. So a bit of a hot button position. seemingly every single off season. So that'll be a lot of fun. We look forward to doing that. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next week.